Guys, welcome back to part 3 in our series on the Journals of Jacques Vallee. In parts 1 and 2, we looked at the origins of the modern UFO disclosure movement. We traced it back to 2013, talked about existential threats which may be impending, and documented the strange mythology coming out of To the Stars Academy and Tom DeLonge back in 2016. Today's final episode is going to look at the disclosure movement from a different angle. Today, we're actually looking at the fight against disclosure. And this is one of the most fascinating things that we see in Vallee's journals, not simply in his most recent one. Actually, the bulk of this content will be coming from Forbidden Science 5, 4, and even dipping back into 3. All of this centers around the identity of one of the most mysterious individuals associated with the world of ufology. And that is the legendary Dr. Ronald Pandolfi. By examining the role of Pandolfi, we'll be able to better understand how UFO secrecy works and the methods and techniques being deployed today, even right now, in the UFO disclosure community. Have you ever asked yourself, why is it that the UFO disclosure movement is such a mess? Why is it that everyone is bickering and infighting? Well, I think by examining the information we have in today's episode, we may get closer to answering that question. And actually, I really believe that this information will act as a critical piece in your discernment toolkit to understand what's really going on around us. Now, before we get started, I do just want to put a disclaimer out there. I've been looking at this now for a year. I've tried to source every single piece of information I have available to me in every book that I can find. But I may well make mistakes. And so I want to be very clear. This is me theorizing. This is me doing my best to put the pieces together. And for all I know, I'm missing a crucial piece. But I did feel that what I found was so important that it was worth sharing with the wider community. But with that disclaimer out of the way, I really do believe the best place for us to start is by getting a big picture understanding of exactly how UFO secrecy works. Because when we see that big picture, we'll be better able to understand the actions and behaviors of Dr. Ronald Pandolfi and other mysterious individuals just like him. The first time the name Ron Pandolfi really caught my eye was when I was doing a deep dive on Bill Clinton, John Podesta, and their quest for UFO disclosure in the 90s. Before they went down many different rabbit holes and many different routes to try and get UFO information, they actually started off in the most sensible place that you would think to look. They sent a request to the CIA to make sure that Clinton's science advisor, John, often known as Jack Gibbons, could get a briefing on UFOs. That request found its way to the desk of Dr. Ronald Pandolfi. So who is Dr. Pandolfi? Well, you may have heard different rumors about him, like the idea that he's the keeper of the weird desk in the CIA, the place where all the paranormal and strange stuff gets funneled to. Maybe you've heard stories about how he's briefed multiple presidents on various topics, that he's one of these people who gets called into the Oval Office to deliver critical intelligence briefings to the highest elected official in the land.
He would go in the morning, the national intelligence estimate to the President of the United States, give him the information, sit there with the president. All these presidents, Pandolfi.
If there's a briefing given to the president, it's Ronald Pandolfi that does it.
Perhaps you've heard his name associated with nearly every single piece of UFO lore if you dig just a little bit below the surface. And maybe you've heard from people that it's almost impossible to understand his motivations and what it is that he's trying to accomplish. Well, that would be a pretty good summary, I think, of Dr. Pandolfi at a cursory level. But what we can guess at are a few points. Firstly, it seems that Dr. Pandolfi got his PhD from UCLA in physical sciences. After graduating, he went straight into the CIA, where eventually he would end up working for the legendary Dr. Christopher Green, often known as Kit Green. Kit Green was the individual responsible for the weird desk that we mentioned just a moment ago. So this meant that he was getting a ton of UFO and paranormal and other strange information being directed towards the CIA. According to some estimates, there were as many as 15,000 UFO files associated with this office when Dr. Pandolfi would inherit it from Kit Green. This inheritance happened somewhere in the 80s, although it's difficult to be precise exactly. I'd say somewhere around 1985 seems reasonable. And by the mid-90s, he was called to testify to the Senate Committee on Intelligence in the midst of the Laurel and Hughes crisis, where information from Laurel and Hughes, a satellite intelligence company, had been sold to China, causing questions about whether or not you could sell such sensitive information and whether it would hurt the United States' geopolitical aims. Now, that might seem like a somewhat occult story, but the reason it's so important is that in the reporting on this, Dr. Pandolfi was referred to as the CIA's highest-ranking scientist, a term that is often applied to him. Now, I bring this up to give you a sense of quite how senior and impressive this individual is. From some of the sources that I've spoken to who know Dr. Pandolfi, they've talked about how incredibly intelligent he is, some of them even using the word genius to describe the way that his mind works. Now, what would you do if you were in Dr. Pandolfi's shoes, and the President of the United States has asked you to come in and give a briefing on the UFO topic? Would you go in and have a conversation? Or would you send someone else, and not someone else from the CIA, someone else who doesn't work for the CIA and is simply an armchair researcher on the topic of UFOs? Essentially, what I'm suggesting here is that you would send a UFO researcher in to talk about what they'd found. Would you do that? Because that is what Dr. Ronald Pandolfi did, and I can hardly believe it still as I say it out loud. Upon getting the request from the White House, Dr. Pandolfi called up his old friend, Bruce Maccabee.
8 days later, whatever it was, I got almost a panic call from the FBI, the CIA guy, saying, "We want you to write a briefing for the President's Science Advisor." Here the CIA is asking me to write a briefing for the President's Science Advisor. I'm thinking, well, I'll have to could do that in a week or 2 weeks. I could get a pretty good briefing. Next thing the guy says is it's got to be ready tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Tuesday afternoon, I'm handed the job of coming up with a presidential-level briefing on UFOs to be given at 8 o'clock the next morning. Well, I did the best I could.
Now, Bruce Maccabee is a PhD, a Navy physicist, a really bright and intelligent guy who is way smarter than I'll ever be, but he isn't the CIA guy on UFOs. The reason Pandolfi called him is because Maccabee had actually given a lecture at the CIA on some of the topics of his research on UFOs. And Pandolfi decided, well, we'll just get him to give that talk and that spiel to Clinton's White House and to his science advisor, which is what happened. Can you imagine being the President of the United States and you're not even getting a CIA employee to come in and have a conversation with you? You're getting Bruce Maccabee, who's going to openly acknowledge, yeah, this is just a talk that I put together. I gave it at the CIA once and I was asked to come in and give you the same talk. Especially when we take into consideration how many UFO files were available at the Weird Desk. There are multiple sources who have used the number 15,000 files that were associated with the Weird Desk at this time. And as we're going to see, Dr. Pandolfi was and continues to be very interested in the UFO topic, but he chose not to brief Bill Clinton. Now, this is a huge deal, and I want to be very clear about why that is. The reason it's big is because the President of the United States is supposed to call the shots on everything. And this little bit of law exposes to us how the world really works. Because Pandolfi didn't face any consequences for this. He simply continued to do what he was doing. And Bill Clinton, for whatever reason, wasn't able to push him. That is incredibly interesting.
And I did attempt to find out if there were any secret government documents that reveal things. And if there were, they were concealed from me too. I wouldn't be the first president that underlings have lied to or that career bureaucrats have waited out. But there may be some career person sitting around somewhere hiding these dark secrets, even from elected presidents. But if so, they successfully eluded me, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you I did try to find out.
It's what triggered me to really go down the rabbit hole and to try and find every single piece of information I could about Dr. Pandolfi. And this is where Dr. Jacques Vallee comes in, because it's through his journals, through Forbidden Science volumes 3, 4, 5, and even into 6, where we can build a more coherent picture of exactly what Dr. Ronald Pandolfi was really doing. And as we do it, a picture comes into focus of an individual who was relentlessly trying to stop UFO disclosure and to keep a lid on UFO secrecy. Dr. Vallee's first interaction with Dr. Pandolfi can be traced all the way back to 1989. In his journals, he simply writes, A new name has come up. Dr. Ron Pandolfi at CIA is one of the technical people who were involved in all of this. Kit and he have compared notes. As Vallee would get more and more acquainted with what Dr. Pandolfi was doing, he would have serious questions. And he had the perfect person to ask those questions to. One of his closest colleagues was Dr. Christopher Kit Green from the CIA, the same Kit Green that we mentioned earlier. This is the individual who hired Dr. Ronald Pandolfi to run the Weird Desk and maintained a close relationship with him afterwards still. Here's Vallee asking Kit Green important questions about Pandolfi. Is Pandolfi fooling around with the crazies? Why? There's real data he could get if he wanted to, I insinuated. Kit's answer surprised me. He gets the most real data there is. The chief science advisor to the French project came to see him secretly, the guy who oversees GPAN. The British Ministry of Defence's chief scientist also spent 2 days with him. He gets all their data. Vallee then comments privately to the reader, still, that CIA office may be only the tip of a very strange iceberg. Kit Green begins to speak once more. The phenomenon is not ultra-dimensional or psychic, Kit went on. It's not amenable to traditional analysis, but it's not magical either. I haven't really discussed UFOs with Ron. He keeps sending me stuff, but we haven't talked about the subject for a year and a half. He's seen the imaging material from spacecraft, all the data. He knows the objects are real and not electrical gremlins. 3 years ago, the director appointed him to get all the briefings and follow the subject. He goes back and forth to Brazil, but he doesn't know what the system is or how it's managed. Vallee then notes, there were so many contradictions in that statement that I didn't even try to sort them out. It sounded like a recorded speech. Kit Green then continues, you have to understand that mere curiosity has never granted anybody access to a closed system. In the whole history of intelligence, the only way to gain access is to provide value. Then you start getting stuff back. So yes, Ron does spend time going around requesting information about the system, but he never gets it. He thinks UFOs are just another enigma, as there are so many in our field, rich and superficial technical data, but meaningless. He thinks the private sector only has soft data. He's a physicist. UFOs are not his main job. In fact, he's coming over here tomorrow to talk about non-destructive testing. That's his real expertise, acoustic resonance scattering. UFOs are something fun he does when he's ready to close his office. And he didn't go to England. I know this because he didn't even have a passport until 2 weeks ago. Then how did he get to Brazil? You said, and then Kit Green comes back. He didn't go to Brazil. He sent people there. He got data from there. And it had nothing to do with UFOs. Vallee then writes privately in his journals, what am I supposed to do with all these contradictory claims? This entry fascinates me because it shows that Dr. Kit Green has a tenuous alliance with both individuals. On the one hand, he kind of wants to open up to Vallee, but as soon as Vallee starts questioning and opening up what he's saying, he shuts it back down again. He did go to Brazil. He didn't go to Brazil. He is interested in UFOs. He's not interested in it at all. By the end of it, Vallee himself was wondering, what do I do with all this contradictory information? What's more interesting is just a few journals ahead, we get another entry which touches on this topic. This time it's a conversation with Hal Puthoff. Hal called me because Pandolfi wanted him to get the most interesting incident he knew of. Hal told him it was my report from Colaris, adding that I had private information I wouldn't publish. Pandolfi is going to Brazil after all. Allegedly for an energy test, magnetism affecting car performance. Kit Green said he was going to Brazil, but then said he wasn't, he didn't have a passport, and he was actually sending people in his place instead. And now from Hal's report, Pandolfi is going down to Brazil, and he is asking about specific UFO cases that have happened down there. What does all of this mean? Well, I think you can probably fill in the blanks. It looks like Dr. Pandolfi is genuinely interested in this topic, but for some reason, that being said out in the open isn't a good thing. There is something about what Dr. Pandolfi is doing which appears to be sensitive and which can't be shared with people who he doesn't have a close relationship with. All the more interesting is another entry which stirs the pot even further. In 1995, Bob Bigelow would set up the National Institute for Discovery Science. On the board were all the familiar faces of modern ufology. You had Dr. Vallee, you had Hal Puthoff, you had Dr. Kit Green, other individuals whose name recur all throughout the journals going up to the modern day. And as part of this, they were already making contact with witnesses, with experiencers, with individuals who could talk to them about sensitive experiences. Not only this, but they were also trying to recruit senior and credible people from the world of defense and intelligence communities and contractors to join this organization to help them in this effort. But just as they were starting out this process, a leak happened. Here's Dr. Vallee. Fred Beckman called today to try to check up on some hearsay. He'd heard that a new group had been formed to study UFOs under Bigelow funding, that it included Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, Dean Judd, Major McDuff, John Peterson, and me, and it had links to CIA Director Woolsey and to E-Systems, that Bob Lazar was working with it through a project involving Hal, Bob Wood, and his son Ryan, that John Alexander and Ron Pandolfi were once considered to run the group, but had been excused, that the goal was propulsion technology, and that it was all a front financed by the government. I gave an evasive response, then called Hal, angrily pointing out that given so many leaks, we could never protect my witnesses. Literally in the next journal entry, Vallee gets confirmation about where these leaks had come from. John Alexander confirms, Pandolfi turns out to be the source of the leaks. Ron was at one meeting I set up. He's violated our confidentiality agreement, and he knew all the names, Schnabel too. Evidently, the non-disclosure agreement we signed with Bob Bigelow has already been violated and is worthless. Why are they spreading all this? I asked. I don't understand it. Pandolfi is on sabbatical from the agency, on a General Motors program. Schnabel couldn't have put all that together alone. That'll make it difficult to recruit good people, I observed. Personally, I'm proud of my association with Mr. Bigelow and you guys. Others may not feel that way. Careers are at stake. In the late 90s, the author Jim Schnabel would write his book, Remote Viewers, The Secret History of America's Psychic Spies, revealing the astonishing truth of the remote viewing program that we're all so much more familiar with today. And in that book, he references Pandolfi in relation to trying to get the program shut down. He writes, Pandolfi had tried unsuccessfully for years to gain access to the DIA's remote viewing program. He was thwarted by Dale Graff and Jack Verona, who kept him off the clearance list in fears that Pandolfi wanted to shut the program down. But the problem doesn't stop there. Just because Pandolfi can't get his clearance into these programs doesn't mean that he won't try and take away your clearance. As Vallee documents in Forbidden Science Volume 5, there were multiple instances where Dr. Pandolfi tried to strip key people of their clearances. There are persistent rumors that Pandolfi's office has interfered with Bill McGarrity's clearance and Martin Piltz's reputation, smearing him at Los Alamos as a UFO believer. Later on in 2004, the same thing would happen again. This time the targets are Dr. Hal Puthoff and even Pandolfi's old boss and mentor, Dr. Christopher Kit Green. Even in 2008, as the group is beginning to plan the ORSAT program, a program which was backed by the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, the highest levels of congressional and Senate power. Even during the foundations of that program, there was a lingering sense of the specter of Dr. Pandolfi. In a conversation that Vallee recounts in his journals, one of his friends and colleagues says that Ron Pandolfi is certain to launch an investigation to seek the source of our funds when he learns about the project. In one final entry from Forbidden Science Volume 4, which I want to read to you, we get Vallee really articulating quite how serious he thinks the situation is involving Dr. Pandolfi and his colleague Dan Smith, who is one of the people that he works with. Vallee writes, I believe I may have about 15 years of active development ahead of me. Time I can use to help research along, even if events and gossips, rumors and bizarre relationships continue to churn up the evil cauldron ufology has become. I was mistaken in associating this delusionary process with marginal elements of society. In the last 3 years, I have met powerful people caught up in what can only be described as a gross deception, ignoring every rational attempt to deal with the facts. The reality of an undercurrent actively driven from Washington is becoming increasingly obvious. The enigmatic Dan T. Smith is setting up meetings all over the Bay Area, again claiming direction from Pandolfi. He dangles money and rumors, arranging luncheons with people, taking their photographs, taping conversations. When Vallee refers to a gross deception occurring, we need to pause and think carefully. Vallee is always careful with his words. He never over-exaggerates. So for him to speak so explicitly and so aggressively about quite how awful what is going on is, should make us pause and reflect. Now I want to deal with a slightly different question. And that question is, why is it that Dr. Pandolfi's role was so antagonistic towards these different types of programs and initiatives? What was it that his role required him to do that led to these quite serious outcomes? Now, you could point to the fact that he ultimately reported in to the Office of Scientific and Weapons Research. Thank you, Christopher Sharp, who helped me to tighten up my thinking on this, which would later become WINPAC, the Weapons Intelligence and Non-Proliferation and Arms Control Group in the CIA. That was the reformed version of OSWR. It was a bigger, tightly organized mandate, focused more on WMDs and what was going on in Iraq. Pandolfi, during the 90s into the 2000s, reported into this function. So why would this function have such a concern for UFO secrecy? That division, whether it's OSWR or WINPAC, is effectively looking at foreign nations who may be a threat to us and trying to determine their capabilities as it pertains to missiles. After 2001 with WINPAC, it would be WMDs, chemical warfare, whatever it is. It's about getting the best possible intelligence on the capabilities that they have. Now, if that's the intelligence operation, which by the way is very interesting because what kinds of technology are you looking for? Surely you'll also be looking for intelligence on advanced propulsion, disc-shaped craft, things that might constitute UFOs. But there's a counterpoint to this, which is as soon as you've built that intelligence arm, you're also going to need a counterintelligence effort as well. And in this instance, counterintelligence would mean looking at your own capabilities and making sure you do everything possible to ensure that no one can find out what they are. And now you're beginning to see these groups in the defense and intelligence community who actually don't report into the program, but instead are setting up efforts to try and probe into the UFO mystery. You've got private organizations like NIDS, you've got the ORSAT program, and you've got all the other bits and pieces, including the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group and all these other parts of the defense and intelligence community who are probing into this, but maybe aren't secured in the way that you want them to be. And maybe could be infiltrated, and maybe could get access to information which you can't control in the same way that you could control the program. I'm building a steel man here for Dr. Pandolfi, right? I'm trying to explain how we could justify this activity. Is it possible that his role and responsibility was to try and constrain groups like this, which could constitute a leak, who could make progress in a way that wouldn't be safe and secure, and to shut them down and to reopen them in the black, which is what we know happened with the remote viewing program, and is said to have happened with many different programs. It's also worth remembering that there is another side to Pandolfi which isn't often talked about, and that is his role and responsibilities as a member of the Jasons. Now, I'd love to be part of the Jasons group. I always thought I should be. But the Jasons actually doesn't refer to a group of people called Jason. That would be very funny if the government was funding that. Actually, it refers to a group of extremely elite scientists at the heart of the world of defense and intelligence, and they meet every year to discuss classified science. And these are the individuals ultimately who will create the guidance on this is where the line should be, on which parts of science should be classified and which parts shouldn't be. Now, if Pandolfi is involved in that group, and that is the function of that group, then doesn't it stand to reason that he may also have additional responsibilities in ensuring that any group of people or program, public or private, that tries to peer into the mysteries of science that are supposed to be kept classified may need to be shut down? The only piece that's missing, though, is this. Don't forget that Dr. Kit Green was Pandolfi's boss. He had, for all intents and purposes, an incredibly similar role in the CIA. And yet Kit Green didn't seem to have this role and responsibility. He didn't seem to be completely aligned with Pandolfi, even when he was covering for him with the whole Brazil fiasco. It was only a few years later that Pandolfi would be trying to strip him of his clearance. Ultimately, what's going on with Pandolfi seems to be bigger. It seems to be more than just OSWR, WinPac, and the Jasons. He almost seems to be operating at a different level. One of the individuals who's had a close relationship with Pandolfi has been the enigmatic Dr. Jacques Sarfati. Here's the Sarfati in a conversation with Danny Jones.
Yeah, who's Ron Pandolfi? Jeremy Rees mentioned that name to me.
Ron Pandolfi, I've known him now for, I don't know, almost 25, 30 years. Okay, Ronnie, and I know his brother. I met his kid, I know his kid. And Ronnie's uncle was some high CIA guy, and one of the Pandolfi. They're like the Angletons, okay? Not quite, maybe, but So when Ronnie went to UCLA, I think in physical chemistry, in like 1980 or so, got his PhD, and his uncle, Pandolfi, already got him say, come, we want you in the CIA. So he rose pretty quick because he had PhD, he's a scientist. So when Ron goes into the CIA, his boss is Kit Green at the Weird Desk.
Now, I don't want to take anything away from Dr. Pandolfi. Like I've mentioned, people who interact with him tend to describe him as exceptionally bright, even using the word genius. And there's no amount of nepotism which can take that away from you. But the fact that Sarfati, someone who knows Dr. Pandolfi well enough to refer to him as Ronnie, by the way, which I've never heard anyone use that phrase before, he describes them as an elite family like the Angletons. So what does that mean in terms of Dr. Pandolfi? And when he joined the CIA and he rose through the ranks so quickly, and he even reaches a point where Dr. Kit Green, his effective senior and mentor, is somewhat bewildered by him. There are many other details that I could jump into here, whether it's referencing Jesse Michaels' amazing video on the occult elements of the various NASA launches, and his reference to Dr. Pandolfi somehow being intimately involved in NROL launch number 16 and all the implications that could have. Or it could be conversations about some of the strange things that Dr. Pandolfi has been involved in, where even his closest colleagues like Dan Smith have questioned whether or not it was legal, only to be told by senior people in the Senate Intelligence Committee not to worry, and that he's dealing with some very competent people. There is so much data that we can dig into, but I am at risk of this video going on for way too long. All I want to say here is I do wonder whether Pandolfi may be existing and operating at a level which simply goes beyond the office that he's in the CIA, in a similar capacity to the way that Timothy Taylor is often speculated to be. An individual who seems to be able to go anywhere and do anything and have total freedom in a way that made Diana Pasulka literally say he seemed to be above the law.
How did you get access to this place?
Okay, so Tyler having amazing access. He's a guy who could get through an airport, like didn't have to go through TSA. He was a guy who the IRS never audited. So he seemed to be above the law. So I describe him in American Cosmic. I was amazed by this person. I was very impacted because I'd never met a person. I didn't even know they existed.
I sometimes wonder whether Pandolfi may exist in that same space. Now, we really are only beginning to get into the interesting stuff right now, because it's not simply that Pandolfi tries to shut down any effort to look into the phenomenon which exists outside of the central program which is controlling it. It's also that he gets intimately involved in the UFO disclosure movement. Now that might sound contradictory. Why would Pandolfi involve himself in a movement which is diametrically opposed to UFO secrecy? But maybe that's the smartest move you can make. No plan to maintain UFO secrecy would be complete without a mechanism to thwart efforts at UFO disclosure. To have this conversation and to spell it out as clearly as possible, I want to give you two examples. Two titans I don't think it's an overestimation to say, of possible UFO disclosure from the 90s into the 2000s. One is Dr. Stephen Greer, an individual who managed to accrue so many whistleblowers and build such a huge platform that he became a real threat to the legacy program and the secrecy that had been built up around it. The other is Joseph Firmage, a former Silicon Valley software CEO who achieved global success as part of the rise of the internet, the dot-com boom, and basically was a household name in Silicon Valley, who would have a UFO experience and then would decide to go into this topic and to try and push it forwards.
Industry executive in California, Joe Firmage, has changed his life completely after what he believed was an unearthly apparition.
The opportunity that I've had, having entered this space, is to meet with some of the most senior military and scientific people in the United States of America who have privately confirmed to me the reality of the UFO phenomenon.
Now, you claim to have had a personal encounter with an otherworldly being. Tell me about that.
I was reading papers which for the first time clearly describe a way to engineer gravity. That's a revolutionary concept. And so one night, after reading one of these papers, I went to sleep, and the next morning I had a rather unusual experience. I referred to it more like a near-death experience than an actual encounter, because the being that I saw in my bedroom was more like an image than a tangible object. But we had a very interesting conversation, and it was quite germane to the subject that I had been studying.
Both of these individuals had such huge potential for the movement. But interestingly, they both would begin to suffer from delusions of grandeur. They both would also begin to promise increasingly far out things, claiming that they were just one moment, one step, one investment away from delivering absolute breakthrough technology, which would shatter the secrecy and transform the world. All they needed was funding, support, backers who could help them deliver it. I wonder if you can begin to see what might be going on here. Is it possible that someone from the defense and intelligence community, maybe from the CIA, had reached out to these individuals right when they were having their biggest moments of success and had started whispering in their ears and spinning them in circles? We all know that the CIA has been exceptional in psychological manipulation, dating all the way back to its very foundations. Of course it is, because it needs to be to fulfill its objectives. So do you think they have the capability to figure out the psychological profile of the leaders of the UFO disclosure movement? Even maybe of some of your favorite YouTubers or individuals who are out there right now who seem to be getting spun in circles. Maybe they figure out the psychological profile of the individual and figure out how to slowly veer them off track, pointing them down endless avenues of nothingness, making them fight with individuals who actually have integrity in order to tear the movement apart, and turning them into passive receptors, turning them into individuals who simply wait for the next drip which will come from their sources. What a wonderful way to slow down a disclosure movement. Now, before we go deeper on Greer and Firmage, because there is a lot more to say, I wonder if some of you might have asked, hey, aren't there other people who could also fit this model? What about Tom DeLonge and the To the Stars Academy initiative? Doesn't that fit the model that we just described of an individual with a huge platform who suddenly breaks out and says, I want to push for disclosure? They start promising breakthrough technology, seeking funding. At points, DeLonge sounded incredibly excitable, like he believed they were on the brink of some huge revolution. Doesn't that fit the model so well? And it does. And you know what's really disturbing? Is there's actually evidence that DeLonge was working with Dr. Pandolfi.
And then I chased the highest level intelligence people, and that's where I ended up in the last little while, is following Dr. Ronald Pandolfi, who I think you know who he is. And,
oh, sure.
Yeah, and his efforts to try to get
working with. He's been working with. I don't know him personally. I know more than you would think about him, though. And he's also been working with Tom DeLonge.
Yeah.
I will never forget when I first heard that audio clip. I will never forget the spine-tingling sensation of realizing that this one individual who I've looked at exhaustively, DeLong and To the Stars Academy, was connected to this other individual who I was looking at exhaustively, and thinking through all the possible implications. And I wasn't the first. There were many, many before me whose articles I've read and whose notes I've reviewed. And there's one data point that they point to, which is shocking. What's the name of the organization that DeLong created? It's currently called To the Stars, but prior to that, it was called To the Stars Academy. And prior to that, it was called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. It's very long. You sort of stumble around it. Who would come up with a name like this? Well, this was a renaming of the original organization. It was originally just called To the Stars, which is what it's called again today. So why this strange blip? Why this strange name change? Well, the name change happened in 2017. And what might astonish you is to realize that there was another organization with an incredibly similar name which existed prior to it. Let me introduce you to InterNASA, the International Academy of Sciences and Arts, launched by Joseph Firmage in the years before TTSA changed its name. What's remarkable is that Joseph Firmage's project for UFO disclosure followed an almost identical model to the Stars Academy when you look at it on paper. It was also a UFO disclosure group. They also worked with government insiders and claimed to have secret advisors from the government. They also recruited Hal Puthoff and Kit Green. They were also claiming to work on revolutionary breakthrough technology and were seeking funding for it. And they would even establish an entertainments and TV division. How remarkable is this? And why would two organizations like this have such a similar name, especially when it's such a strange and obscure terminology? Is it possible that we could trace this back to Dr. Pandolfi? Could you say, as some people have, that Pandolfi tried to use Firmage to establish this vision and failed, and then used DeLong and his group to try and do it later? Is this the latest iteration of Dr. Pandolfi's fly trap in order to catch all of us as we seek out the truth, only to be drawn into a program and a mechanism designed to deceive? I can totally understand why individuals who look at this data may think, case closed, we have the links here between these organizations and Dr. Pandolfi, and we can totally discredit TTSA off the back of this. But I actually had a conversation with Joseph Firmage, and I asked him the question, why would an organization be called this? What was your intention? What does it all mean? And why did they use the same name? Well, Joseph Firmage had a clear answer for this. Whilst we're on the topic of InterNASA, you talked there about the timeline of kind of 2013 onwards. The idea was taken and sort of morphed into this new thing. But I've got a question about that, which is, why would they use the same name? You know, I just feel it seems like it seems almost cheeky.
Cheeky is a very apt word. Yeah, I was surprised too. Half of me thought, well, gee, it's either an insult or a compliment, or maybe they're hoping that we'll have a reunion of sorts or something in the future.
Another question on that for me is, why did you choose that name? Because again, you know, when I saw those two names crossing over, the first thing I did is I thought, have I heard that before? And of course, when America was founded, you had the American Academy of Sciences and Arts, which was this kind of think tank type environment the founding fathers created to just for the liberty of ideas, right? And so I was kind of thinking, did you do it intentionally as a sort of a second version of this classic institution? Was that the thought process?
That's exactly my thinking. It's modeled along the lines of a guild. You know, the concept of a guild, a true Renaissance reborn is my true agenda.
For him, it was about triggering and signaling a new Renaissance. There already exists an American Academy of Sciences and Arts. And this institution is one of the oldest institutions in the United States of America, founded by the founding fathers. It goes all the way back to those very early days. This organization is prestigious. It has been a defining guiding light in terms of the scientific discourse and the arts as well. The original seal of the organization reads Sub Libertate Florent, which means under freedom they flourish. But the scientific community, which has filled the organization, has increasingly become a place where secrecy is used and authority is weaponized to prevent real scientific progress from occurring, as per the secrecy mechanisms that we spoke about earlier. Individuals who have been associated with the organization include Oppenheimer, H.P. Robertson from the Robertson panel, Edward Condon, Carl Sagan, Enrico Fermi, Edward Teller, Donald Menzel. There are even 3 people from the MJ12 documents, whatever you think about them, they are quite interesting, including Lloyd Berkner, Detlev Bronk, and Vannevar Bush. This group hasn't become a place where freedom and light flourishes. It's a place where the scientific elite coalesce to reinforce each other's already existing worldviews, and for those individuals who do have access to the truth, to ensure that they set a tempo that the rest of the organization and scientific culture will follow. It seems that what Joseph Firmage was really trying to do with this name was to re-establish the American Academy of Sciences and Arts as a new venture designed to actually fulfill its missions and objectives. Now, I don't really think I believe in what Joseph Firmage is doing today. He seems like a really nice guy, but I like that vision. And I can understand why Hal Puthoff, who was part of that organization, might have said, hey, why don't we use this terminology? Why don't we also try and trigger a renaissance, a reactivation of this original vision of what this organization was supposed to be, by interfacing not simply with the scientific community, but also in terms of entertainment. And that makes sense, because the original people who started the organization, the actual practical To the Stars organization, were a mix of scientists and entertainment people, a la Tom DeLonge. But ultimately, there is a far more compelling case that we can make that shows that it's very likely that Pandolfi is in no way associated with the To the Stars initiative, and ultimately only wanted to see it fail. When we ask the question whether the To the Stars group and all of its associated members could ever work with Dr. Pandolfi, and you seriously open up that discussion, the answer becomes very obvious. Absolutely no way. There is absolutely no way it could ever work. If there's one thing we know about To the Stars Academy, it's that it was pushing for a Hillary Clinton presidency. And it was doing this along with people like John Podesta. John Podesta, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, these are all individuals who had a run-in with Dr. Pandolfi back in '93 when he refused to deliver a serious UFO briefing for them. Earlier on, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned this case that happened where Laurel and Hughes, this intelligence satellite company, was selling information into China. And Dr. Pandolfi was called to the Senate Intelligence Committee to testify about what was going on. This was political. Bill Clinton was the one who had signed off on this being okay because the CEO of Laurel and Hughes had funded his campaign. Pandolfi was directly going at Bill Clinton in this moment where he briefed the Senate and Intelligence Committee. According to the likes of Grant Cameron, Dan Smith, and Jack Sarfati, individuals who have an ongoing relationship with Dr. Pandolfi to this day, he has been very pro-Trump and very anti-Clinton. This pro-Trump leaning is backed up by an email that Robert Collins, a former official from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, would claim to receive from Pandolfi. The email reads, "I have been waiting for President-elect Trump to take office before taking more serious actions. He is very pro-disclosure and very anti-disinformation." This has huge consequences because the individuals associated with To the Stars Academy were very pro-Clinton and very anti-Trump. Michael Hayden, the general we talked about in part 2 of this series, explicitly called out Donald Trump and supported Hillary Clinton. And let's not forget Christopher Mellon, one of the key players in the To the Stars Academy initiative. In 2020, 70 former national security officials issued a statement claiming that Donald Trump was dangerously unfit to serve another term. Christopher Mellon backed the statement. These groups are antithetical. They would never work together. And I think when you build that big picture, you begin to realize there is very little likelihood that they could all sit together and be one cohesive unit. Let alone the fact that Vallee has consistently documented all of the problems that Pandolfi has caused. Do you not think he would have communicated this to all of his close friends in the To the Stars Academy movement? But ultimately, the biggest evidence that I see is the weaponization of the likes of Dr. Stephen Greer and Joseph Firmage to try and prevent the success of the To the Stars Academy group mission. There is a video available online of Dr. Greer reading an email during a live stream that he was doing with some of his supporters. I don't feel comfortable showing it here because I suspect because of the negative context in which I'm going to show it, it might lead to my channel getting some kind of strike, and I don't want to risk that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you what Dr. Stephen Greer reads from that email whilst he's having a conversation on the live stream. One of the most senior CIA people in the history of the UFO subject, I do not want to share his name because he's still actively involved behind the scenes, assisting us. This is one of the reasons I'm still alive. I won't go into it any more than that. And he wrote to me about this group that on December 31st, this To the Stars Academy group, and his first email was very sweet because he said, "I hope you have not been negatively impacted by TTSA. I anticipate it'll dissipate soon." And that was on December 30th of 2017. And then he wrote, "I have watched that rat pack run scams against the US government, loony billionaires, and now the average citizen. Keep up the good work. I have been studying this subject for 35 years. And then Greer cuts in, "This is one of the most senior people in the CIA on the committee dealing with UFOs and ETs. Literally, this man, whose name I will not discuss at this point while I'm still alive, was the man who, after I briefed the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton, was asked to go into the Oval Office to clean up the mess when it was found that this subject was real and the president and the CIA director at the time was being lied to about it." I hope I've done my best there to try and represent Stephen Greer's rambling tones as he was talking through this, but I think that's pretty compelling evidence that that person behind the email might be Dr. Ronald Pandolfi. Which other very senior CIA person who is closely linked to this topic going back for 35 years also claimed to somehow be involved in Bill Clinton's disclosure moment? I mean, the stars line up so well here. And what's fascinating is whoever wrote that email and whoever's communicating with Stephen Greer is clearly winding him up and pushing him against the To the Stars Academy initiative. Now that's very interesting, but you also have somewhat of a similar backstory going on with the Joseph Firmage initiative. Robert Kiviat is a famous TV presenter from America, and he was recruited to help Joseph Firmage with his InterNASA project for the TV and entertainments division. And when he got involved, he found himself tangled up in a whole bunch of crazy stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Later on, he would file a lawsuit, and he's also now given many interviews where he's spoken quite candidly about what he saw going on behind the scenes. Here's what Kiviat had to say about Joseph Firmage and the InterNASA project. "Often, when I would have my daily phone calls with Firmage, and also with Pandolfi's most trusted operative, who is stationed at Firmage's Utah home laboratory, overseeing technical progress being made on the gravity control device and reporting back to Pandolfi on the East Coast, Pandolfi would call in and they would both have to abruptly end our calls," Kiviat says. Any claim Pandolfi makes that he did not call in that frequently or was not majorly involved in monitoring InterNASA's technology development is preposterous and demonstrably false. As you read through the entire article, it becomes clear that Pandolfi and Firmage were trying to accelerate the entertainments division for InterNASA at exactly the moment that To the Stars had announced they were going to be launching their entertainment division and their Discovery TV series. The plan was that by hiring Kiviat, they could beat TTS to the punch. If I had to build a hypothesis about what is going on here, it goes something like this. On the one hand, there has been an attempt to derail serious disclosure efforts. People like Greer, people like Firmage had potential, and they were derailed. It looks like There may have been an attempt to make contact with DeLong and To the Stars Academy, but all the evidence bears out that that would never have worked, and then we never hear anything else about that ever occurring. What we then see is Firmage and Greer clearly competing with the To the Stars Academy organization. And if you think about it, this is exactly what you would want to do if you were trying to damage the UFO disclosure movement. Turn everybody against each other, race with each other, compete with each other, argue with each other, cause dissension. And it makes you wonder what other dramas that you see on Twitter and X may in fact have their source in a well-planned psychological operation which is designed to destroy the movement. In 1994, a US Army Psychological Operations Manual was published, and it tells us exactly how you destroy an activist movement. By pitting one group against another group, psyop personnel can emphasize the differences and create a rift between the groups. As a result, the groups develop a we-they situation. Loss of group cohesion weakens the resolve of the target audience. And of course, the other mechanism is the one that we know a lot about, and that is to flood the field with disinformation. Whether it's the Serpo hoax and this absurd story of a 20-year program of sending people to another planet, the disinformation that's been spread around Richard Doty, whether it's stories of interdimensional portals, of speaking to aliens in Area 51, Dan Smith's bizarre claims about eschatology and the end of the world, Stephen Greer, Joe Firmage, Jack Sarfati, all these people spinning on their heads, talking in circles, causing chaos in the movement. And to what end? Well, to spread chaos and dissension within the only movement that we have, which could feasibly help us get to the truth. And as we're going to see, just in the moment when UFO confirmation was being rolled out, just in the moment when there was a plan to finally push to get some information out, the floodgates opened and disinformation spread everywhere. In Vallee's most recent journals, one of the things that really struck me was a collection of entries which documented an astonishing surge in disinformation flooding the UFO community, starting almost in time with the date when confirmation was due to be rolled out. On the 11th of June 2014, Kit is puzzled by the amount of disinformation and misinformation currently being built up around ufology. The government keeps misinterpreting and distorting this field. The 2nd of August, 2014. The legends ooze freely from DC now. I even have friends in Vegas and Austin who buy them. The problem is that such intrigue also oozes from people within the government, with bizarre impunity. Why? The 1st of March, 2015. For the first time, I have a sense of foreboding given the growth of disinformation. The 8th of March 2015. What's changed is the recent evidence that the interference isn't coming from small deluded groups or isolated bureaucrats, but is in fact massive and well managed. That final entry comes from early in 2015, just at the moment that John Podesta released his famous tweet. And it's right in that moment when we seem to have our first glimmer at maybe being able to see the truth as a human civilization that Vallee documents a systematic plan to flood the airwaves with disinformation. In 2019, Christopher Kit Green, the individual who hired Pandolfi and would later almost have his clearances stripped by that same individual, would make an astonishing statement which really tells us the temperature of the situation that we're in. A shocking development. Kit writes to Gary and me that he plans to tell our closest colleagues, I have decided that Jacques Vallee was 100% correct starting 5 or 6 years ago. Ufology research is so contaminated, bastardized, trivialized, and used by unethical groups as to be unavailable for serious study. He was correct when he withdrew and said, I will do my own work. Something traumatic must have happened on his side, as it did on mine. He adds a warning with which I emphatically agree. There is true evil afoot, including lies, work products that are harmful to kids, manipulation of memes. ... We can see that there is a concerted effort to try and prevent UFO disclosure. That means there is something there. And I think we can say there is also a concerted effort to stop this new wave of UFO disclosure. And you'll remember in my former video, I really poked holes by looking at Vallee's work at what is going on with To the Stars Academy. What these advisors were telling Tom, people like Bill Tompkins, the ultimate objectives of that movement. But despite all of that, there is still resistance from the defense and intelligence community through people like Dr. Pandolfi. And to me, in a strange way, that's reassuring, because it tells me that there is some acorn of goodness in this movement, despite all the chaos and the different people trying to co-opt it for negative purposes. Personally, I do suspect there are good intentions. Whether or not something good will come out of it will have to be seen. But for now, I hope all of this extra context has opened your eyes to the sheer complexity of what we describe as UFO disclosure. The reality is it is infected, it is complicated, and we should not assume that everyone is working towards the same end. Good people can be distracted, they can be co-opted and sent down random avenues. Good people can be weaponized and turned against the rest of the community. We need to do our best to stay objective. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and join the Patreon if you want to support this work and this level of research. By liking, sharing, and subscribing and commenting, those are free things that you can do which boost this kind of content relative to other kinds of content. If you think that this type of work deserves more merit, those things are ways that you can support it for free right now. And if you don't want to do that, I will not disrespect you at all. You don't owe it to me, but if you want to do it, I'll be grateful. All that's left to say is, my name's Jason Samosa. This has been Jason Samosa's Ufology Moment. And until next time, cheers.